Hello Internet! I wanted to do another video today, but I didn't really have, anything I really wanted to talk about. So I got an idea. A couple of years ago, the YouTuber Sargon of Akkad, who's otherwise mostly dealing with cultural and political issues, decided to make a channel where he basically read ancient historical texts. It's called Ancient Recitation, and it's really, really good. If you haven't watched it, even if you don't necessarily care much for Sargon, I say go and watch that particular channel, because it is basically amazing. It's also sad that he hasn't actually updated it for a while. I thought, however, hey, I might actually, step up to that for a while. This isn't going to be necessarily a long video, and it's not going to be recitations per se. What this is going to be, just for fun, is reading from Saxo Gramaticus, Chronicle of Denmark. And the reason it's not actually going to be recitations is that the version I have is in Danish, so I have to do some quick translations at the same time. But yeah, I felt like I would do a short video just reading through basically Saxo Grammaticus' story about, the earliest Danish kingdom. So yeah, enjoy. Now Dan and Angle, with whom the stock of the Danes begin, were begotten by Humble, their father, and were the governors, and not only the founders of our race. And these two men, though by the wish and favour of their country they gained the lordship of the realm, and, owing to the wondrous deserts of their bravery, got the supreme power by the consenting voice of their countrymen, yet lived without the name of king, the usage whereof was not then commonly resorted to by any authority among our people. Of these two, Angle, the fountain, so runs the tradition, of the beginning of the Anglian race, caused his name to be applied to the district which he ruled. This was an easy kind of memorial wherewith to immortalize his fame, for his successors, a little later, when they gained possession of Britain, changed the original name of the island for a fresh title, namely that of their own land. This action was much thought of by the ancients, witness Bede, no mean figure amongst the writers of the church, who was a native of England, and made it his care to embody the doings of his country in the most hallowed treasury of his pages, deeming it equally a religious duty to glorify in writing the deeds of his land, and to chronicle the history of the church. From Dan, however, so saith antiquity, the pedigrees of our kings have flowed in glorious series, like channels from some parent spring. Gritha, a matron most highly revered amongst the Teutons, bore him two sons, Humble and Lother. The ancients, when they were to choose a king, were wont to stand on stones planted in the ground, and to proclaim their votes in order to foreshadow the steadfastness of the stones that the deed would be lasting. By this ceremony, Humble was elected king at his father's death, thus winning a novel favour from his country. But by the malice of ensuing fate, he fell from a king into a common man, for he was taken by Lother in war, and bought his life by yielding up his crown. Such, in truth, were the only terms of escape offered him in his defeat. Forced therefore by the injustice of a brother to lay down his sovereignty, he furnished the lesson to mankind that there is less safety, though more pomp, in the palace than in the cottage. Also he bore his wrong so meekly that he seemed to rejoice at the loss of title, as though it was a blessing, and I think in this he had a shrewd sense of the quality of a king's estate. But Lother played the king as insupportably as he had played the soldier, inaugurating his reign straightway with arrogance and crime. For he counted it uprightness to strip all the most eminent of life and goods, and to clear his country of its loyal citizens, thinking all his equals in birth were thus rivals for his crown. He was soon chastised for his wickedness, for he met his end in an insurrection of his country, which has once bestowed on him his kingdom, yet now bereft him of his life. Skiold, his son, inherited his natural bent, but not his behaviour, avoiding his inborn perversity by great discretion in his tender years, and thus escaping all traces of his father's taint. So he appropriated what was alike the more excellent and the earlier share of the family character, for he wisely departed from his father's sins and became a happy counterpart of his grandsire's virtues. This man was famous in his youth amongst the huntsmen of his father for his conquest of a monstrous beast, a marvellous incident which augured his future prowess, for he chanced to obtain leave from his guardians, who was rearing him very carefully, to go see the hunting. And there a bear of extraordinary size met him. He had no spear, but with the girdle that he commonly wore, he contrived to bind it, and gave it to his escort to kill. More than this, many champions of tried prowess was at the same time of his life vanquished by him singly. Of these Atal and Scat were renowned and famous. While but 15 years of age, he was of unusual bodily size, and displayed mortal strength in its perfection. And so mighty were the proof of his powers, that the rest of the kings of the Danes were called after him by a common title, the Skioldungs. Those who were wont to live an abandoned and flaccid life, and to sap their self-control by wantonness, this man vigilantly spurred to the practice of virtue in an active career. Thus the ripeness of Skiold's spirit outstripped the fullness of his strength, and he fought battles at which one of his tender years could scarce look on. And he thus waxed in years and valour. He beheld the beauty of Alfhid, the daughter of the king of the Saxons, and sued for her hand, and, for her sake, in the sight of the armies of the Teutons and the Danes, challenged and fought with Scat, governor of Alemannia, and a suitor for the same maiden, who he slew, afterwards crushing the whole nation of the Alemannians and forcing them to pay tribute, they being subjugated by the death of their captain. Skiold was eminent for patriotism as well as arms, for he annulled unrighteous laws, and most heedfully executed whatsoever made for the amendment of his country's condition. Further, he regained by his virtue the realm that his father's wickedness had lost. He was the first to proclaim the law abolishing manumissions. A slave, to whom he had chanced to grant his freedom, had attempted his life by stealthy treachery, and he exacted a bitter penalty, as though it was just that the guilt of one freedman should be visited upon all. He paid off all men's debts from his own treasury, and contended, so to say, with all other monarchs in courage, bounty, and generous dealing. The sick he used to foster, and charitably gave medicines to those sore stricken, bearing witness that he had taken on him the care of his country, and not of himself. He used to enrich his nobles not only with home taxes, but also with plunder taken in war, being wont to ever that the prize money should flow to the soldiers, and only the glory to the general. Thus delivered of his bitterest rival in wooing, he took as the price of combat the maiden for the love of whom he had fought, and wedded her in marriage. Soon after he had by her a son, Gram, whose wondrous parts savoured so strongly of his father's virtues that he was deemed to tread in their very footsteps. The days of Graham's youth were enriched with surpassing gifts of mind and body, and he raised them to the crest of renown. Posterity did such homage to his greatness that in the most ancient poems of the Danes royal dignity is implied in his very name. He practised with the most zealous training whatsoever serves to sharpen and strengthen the bodily powers. Taught by the fencers, he trained himself by sedulous practice to parrying and dealing blows. He took to wife the daughter of his upbringer, Roa, she being his foster sister and of his own years, in order to better show his gratefulness for his nursing. A little while after, he gave her in marriage to a certain Bess, since he had oft times used his strenuous service. In this partner of his warlike deeds he put his trust, and he has left it a question whether he won more renown by Bess' valour or his own. Gram, chancing to hear that Groa, daughter of Sigtrygg, king of the Swedes, were plighted to a certain giant, and holding accursed a union so unworthy of the royal blood, entered on a Swedish war, being destined to emulate the prowess of Hercules in resisting the attempt of monsters. He went into Gothland, and in order to frighten people out of his path, strode on clad in goat's skin, swathed in motley hides of beasts, and grasping in his right hands a dreadful weapon, thus feigning the attire of a giant, when he met Groa herself, riding with a very small escort of women on foot and making her way, as it chanced, to the forest pools to bathe. She thought it was her betrothed who had hastened to meet her, and was scared with feminine alarm at so strange a garb, so, flinging up the reins and shaking terribly all over, she began in the song of her country thus: I see that a giant, hated of the king, has come, and darkens the highways with his stride. Or my eyes place me false, for it has oft befallen bold warriors to skulk behind the skin of a beast. Then began Bess. Maiden, seated on the shoulders of the steed, tell me, pouring forth in thy turn words of answer, what is thy name, and of what line art thou born? Groa replied, Groa is my name, my sire is a king, glorious in blood, gleaming in armour. Disclose to us thou also who thou art, or whence sprung. To whom Bess, I am Bess, brave in battle, ruthless to foes, a terror to nations, and oft drenching my right hand in the blood of foes. Then said Groa, Who, prithee, commands your lines? Under what captain raise ye the war standard? Which prince controls the battle? Under whose guidance is the war made ready? Bess in answer, Gram, the best in battle, rules the array. Force nor fear can serve him. Flaming pyre and cruel swords and ocean bile has never made him afraid. Let by him, maiden, we raise the golden standard of war. Groa once more, Turn your feet and go back hence, lest Sigtrygg vanquish you with all your array, and fasten you to a cruel stake, your throat haltered with the cord, and doom your carcasses to the stiff noose, and, glaring evilly, thrust your corpses to the hungry raven. Bess again, Gram, ere he shall shut his own eyes in death, shall first make him a ghost, and smiting him on the crest shall send him to Tartarus. We fear no camp of the Swedes. Why threaten us with ghastly dooms, maiden? Groa answered him, Behold, I will ride thence to see the roof of my father, which I know, that I may not rashly set eyes on the array of my brother who is coming. And I pray that your death doom may tarry for you who abide. Bess replied, Daughter, to thy father go back with good cheer, nor imprecate swift death upon us, nor let choleric shake thy bosom, for often have a woman, harsh at first and harder to woo, yielded the second time. Whereupon Gram could no longer brook to be silent, and pitching his tones gruffly so as to mimic a gruesome and superhuman voice, accosted the maiden thus: Let not the maiden fear of the brother of the fleet giant, nor turn pale because I am nigh her. For I am sent by Grip, and never seek the couch or embrace of damsels, save when their wish matches mine. Groa answered, Who is so mad as to wish to the layman of giants? Or that woman could love bed that genders monsters? Who could be the wife of demons, or know the seed whose fruit is monstrous? Or who would fain share her couch with a barbarous giant? Who caresses thorns with her fingers? Who would mingle honest kisses with mire? Who would unite shaggy limbs to smooth ones which correspond not? Full ease of love cannot be taken when nature cries out against it, nor doth the love customary in the use of women sought with monsters. Having won Groa, Gram proceeded and learned that the road was beset by 2 robbers. These he slew simply by charging them as they rushed covetously forth to despoil him. This done, loath to seem as to have done any service to the soil of an enemy, he put timbers under the carcasses of the slain, fastened them thereto, and stretched them so as to counterfeit an upright standing position, so that in their death they might menace in seeming those whom their life they had harmed in truth, and in that terrible even after their disease they may block the road in effigy as much as they had once in deed. whence it appeared that in slaying the robbers he took thought for himself and not for Sweden, for he betokened by so singular an act how great a hatred of Sweden filled him. Having heard from the diviners that Sigtrygg could only be conquered by gold, he straightway fixed a knob of gold to his wooden mace, equipped himself therewith in the war wherein he attacked the king, and obtained his desire. This exploit was besung by Bess in the most zealous strain of eulogy. Gram, the fierce wielder of the prosperous mace, knowing not the steel, rained blows on the outstretched swords, and with a stock beat off the lands of the mighty. Following the decrees and wills of the god, he brought low the glory the powerless Swedes, doing their king to death and crushing him with the stiff gold. For he pondered the arts of war. He wielded in his clasp the ruddy flashing wood, and the victoriously with noble stroke made their fallen captain writhe. Shrewdly he conquered with the hardness of gold him whose fate had forbade should be slain by steel, unsorted, waging war with a worthier metal. This treasure, for which its deviser claimed glory and the height of honour, shall abide yet more illustrious hereafter, known far and wide in ambler fame. Having now slain Sigtrygg, king of Sweden, Gram desired to confirm his possession of the empire which he had won in war, and therefore, suspecting that Svarin, the governor of Gothland, of aspiring to the crown, he challenged him to combat and slew him. This man's brethren, of whom he had 7 lawfully born, and 9 the sons of a concubine, sought to avenge their brother's death, but Gram, in an unequal contest, cut them off. Gram, for his marvellous prowess, was granted a share in the sovereignty of his father, who was now in extreme age, and thought it better and likewise more convenient to give his own blood a portion of the supremacy of the realm, than now in the setting of his life to administer it without a partner. Therefore Ring, a noble-born Sealander, stirred the greater part of the Danes with desire for insurrection, fancying that one of those men were unripe for his rank, and that the other had run the course of his powers, alleging the weakness in years both, and declaring that the wandering wit of an old man made the one, and that of the boy the other, unfit for royal power. But they fought and crushed him, making him an example to all men that no season of life is to be deemed incompatible with valour. Many other deeds also King Gram did. He declared war against Humblus, king of the Finns, but when he set eyes upon the king's daughter Sine, he laid down his arms. The foeman turned into the suitor, and, promising to put away his own wife, he plighted troth with her. But, while much busied with a war against Norway, which he had taken up against King Svipdag for debauching his sister and his daughter, he heard from a messenger that Sine had, by Humblus' treachery, been promised in marriage to Henry, king of Saxony. Then, inclined to love the maiden more than his soldiers, he left his army, privily made his way to Finland, and came in upon the wedding which was already begun. Putting on a garb of the utmost meanness, he lay down at the table in the seat of no honour. When asked what he brought, he professed skill in leechcraft. At last, when all was drenched in drunkenness, he gazed at the maiden, and amidst the revels of the riotous banquet, cursing deep the fickleness of women, and vaunting loud his own deeds of valour, he poured out the greatness of his wrath in a song like this. Singly against 8, at once I drove the darts of death, and smote 9 with a back-swung sword, when I slew Svarin, who wrongfully assumed his honours and tried to win fame unmerited. Wherefore I have oft died in foreign blood, my blade red with death and reeking with slaughter, and have never blenched at the clash of dagger or the sheen of helmet. Now Sine, the daughter of Humblus, vilely spurns me and endures vows not mine, cursing her ancient troth, and conceiving an ill-ordered love, commits a notable act of female lightness, for she entangles, lures, and bestains princes, rebuffing beyond all others the lordly of birth, yet remaining firm to none, but ever wavering and bringing birth impulses doubtful and divided. And as he spoke, he leapt up from where he lay, and there he cut Henry down, while at the sacred board and the embraces of his friend, carried off his bride from amongst the bridesmaids, felled most of the guests, and bore her off with him in his ship. Thus the bridal was turned into a funeral, and the Finns might learn the lesson, that hands should not be laid against upon the loves of other men. After this, Svipdag, King of Norway, destroyed Gram, who was attempting to avenge the outrage of his sister and the attempt on his daughter's chastity. This battle was notable for the presence of the Saxon forces, who were incited to help Svipdag, not so much by love of him, as by desire to avenge Henry. Thus ends the first part of Book 1 of the Gesta Danorum. I shall return to this some other time, and I fully understand if this is not for everyone's taste, so yeah, those who actually sat through it, I would advise you to, at least next time, I probably should have said this in the entrance, I'll put it in the description, you should go to the Gutenberg project, where you can actually find the full text of Saxo Gramaticus Gesta Danorum, so if you actually find this interesting, you can, read along as I go. We are at the death of Gram, as I said, and next time we will go on to his sons, Guthorm and Hathing, and at least do theirs. But for now, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.